Sir, there seems to be a mistake. This seat is reserved for our premium members. The flight attendant's voice was polite, but her eyes told a different story as she looked down at Michael Jordan. Not the Michael Jordan, though he certainly had the success to match, but a 45-year-old tech entrepreneur whose company, Equity AI, was quietly reshaping how Fortune 500 companies approach diversity and inclusion. Michael glanced up from his laptop, momentarily confused. He'd boarded the Elite Airways flight early, settled into his assigned first-class seat, 4A by the window, and had been reviewing his presentation for tomorrow's tech conference in San Francisco. The presentation represented a potential turning point for his company, a new AI system designed to detect and flag unconscious bias in hiring processes. The irony of the situation unfolding wasn't lost on him. "I am a premium member," Michael replied calmly, reaching for his wallet. He produced his Elite Platinum card and boarding pass. "This is my assigned seat." Behind the flight attendant stood a blonde woman in her 50s, dressed in a tailored beige suit and pearls, tapping her designer watch impatiently. Her name was Barbara Whitman, though she'd soon be known across social media as Elite Airways Karen. Her lips were pressed into a thin line of displeasure, eyes darting between Michael and the flight attendant with growing impatience. "I always sit in 4A on this route," Barbara announced loudly enough for nearby passengers to hear. "It's practically my seat. I've flown this exact flight every month for 3 years. She adjusted her designer handbag, the logo prominently displayed. "The crew knows how particular I am about my seating arrangements." The flight attendant, Sarah, according to her name tag, barely glanced at Michael's credentials before continuing. "I understand, sir, but Ms. Whitman is one of our most valued premium members. Perhaps you'd be more comfortable in another seat? There's a lovely one in row 6. The emphasis wasn't subtle. Neither was the message. Regardless of his status, Michael didn't belong in this seat. The first-class cabin, with its 12 spacious leather seats, was less than half full. This wasn't about availability. It was about preference and prejudice. What Elite Airways didn't know was that they had just made a catastrophic mistake, one that would cost them millions of dollars, 3 employees their jobs, and change company policy forever. 2 hours earlier at the airport, Michael had been helping an elderly passenger find her gate. He'd noticed her confusion at the departure board, the way her hands trembled slightly as she squinted at her boarding pass. Without hesitation, he'd approached her, introduced himself, and gently guided her to her destination. Not because anyone was watching, but because that's who he was. The son of a hospital janitor and a kindergarten teacher who'd raised him to judge people by their character, not their appearance or status. "We might not have much," his father had often told him, "but we've got integrity. Nobody can take that from you unless you give it away." Michael's journey to success hadn't been easy. Growing up on Chicago's South Side, he taught himself coding on a library computer while working part-time jobs to help his parents make rent. The library became his sanctuary, a place where the limitations of his neighborhood couldn't contain his growing ambitions. By 16, he'd created his first rudimentary algorithm to predict bus arrival times, born from his frustration at waiting in the cold Chicago winters. He'd earned a scholarship to MIT, graduated top of his class, and turned down lucrative job offers from tech giants to start Equity AI. While his classmates chased Silicon Valley dreams and Wall Street paychecks, Michael had a different vision: technology that could make the world more fair. His company's mission was deeply personal: to create systems that helped identify and eliminate bias in corporate decision-making. Now, 12 years later, Equity AI was worth $1.2 billion, and worked with companies across the globe, from Fortune 500 corporations to government agencies, including, ironically, elite airways. As the confrontation in first class continued, passengers began to notice. Phone cameras emerged discreetly, capturing what was unfolding. A young woman in seat 2B pressed her lips together in disapproval before beginning to record on her smartphone. An older gentleman across the aisle frowned, his eyes moving between Michael, Sarah, and Barbara. "Sir, I need you to move to another seat," Sarah insisted, her tone hardening. "We have protocols for our regular premium customers." Michael remained, calm despite the humiliation being inflicted upon him. A lifetime of similar encounters had taught him that displaying anger would only reinforce the stereotypes being projected onto him. He'd learned this lesson at 19 when a store security guard had followed him through an electronics store, and again at 27 when a valet had tried to direct him to the service entrance of a hotel where he was the keynote speaker. "I've shown you my boarding pass and premium status," he said evenly. "This is my assigned seat, which I specifically chose for the legroom to work during the flight. I have an important presentation to prepare for." Flight attendant Sarah looked to her colleague, Mark, who had been watching the exchange from the galley. Mark approached with the practiced authority of someone used to being obeyed, tall, mid-40s, with a slight paunch stretching his uniform button. "Is there a problem here?" Mark asked, though his tone made it clear he'd already decided who was causing the problem. "This gentleman is refusing to accommodate Ms. Whitman," Sarah explained, as though Michael had violated some unwritten rule. "She's one of our most loyal customers and always sits in 4A. By now the confrontation had attracted the attention of everyone in first class. A businessman in 3C had paused his phone call. A couple in 5A and 5B exchanged uncomfortable glances. Barbara stood in the aisle, making a show of checking her watch again. "I'm going to miss my connection at this rate," she announced dramatically. "I have an important charity luncheon to attend. People are counting on me being there." Mark leaned down, lowering his voice but still audible to nearby passengers. "Sir, we can do this the easy way or the difficult way. Your choice." His breath smelled of coffee and cinnamon gum. Elite Airways values customers who understand how things work. The threat hung in the air, unspoken but unmistakable. Michael looked between the two flight attendants and Barbara. He had encountered such situations before, contexts where, despite his success, education, and status, his presence was seen as a problem to be solved. Each time he faced the same calculation, the indignity of acquiescence versus the potential consequences of standing firm. "I'm not moving," he stated firmly. "This is my assigned seat." Mark's face tightened, a muscle twitching near his jaw. He straightened his uniform and walked briskly toward the front of the plane, picking up the cabin phone. The cabin fell quiet as passengers watched the drama unfold, the awkward silence punctuated only by the ambient sounds of boarding in the main cabin. Barbara remained standing in the aisle, her designer handbag clutched against her chest like a shield. "This is beyond ridiculous," she muttered, loud enough to be heard. "I've been flying first class since before you were—" She caught herself, but her implication was clear. A passenger in 2C, a young white woman with thick-framed glasses, spoke up. "Excuse me, but why can't the lady just sit in another seat? There are plenty available." Her voice quavered slightly with nervousness, but her eyes were steady. "Mind your own business," Barbara snapped back. "This doesn't concern you." Minutes later, the captain emerged from the cockpit. Captain Reynolds was in his 60s, with salt and pepper hair and the confident demeanor of someone who expected immediate compliance with his authority. His uniform was impeccable, 4 gold stripes gleaming on each shoulder. "Sir," the captain addressed Michael directly, "I understand there's a situation. My crew has informed me you're being uncooperative." Michael took a deep breath. The injustice burned in his chest, but he kept his voice level. "Captain, with all due respect, I'm sitting in my assigned seat with a valid boarding pass and premium status. I've done nothing wrong or disruptive. Sir, we have certain protocols for accommodating our regular customers." The captain's voice was reasonable, as though explaining something to a child. "Ms. Whitman flies with us weekly and has certain expectations." "What protocols specifically require me to give up my assigned seat to another passenger who simply prefers it?" Michael asked. "I'd like to see that in writing." Captain Reynolds' expression hardened. "Sir, if you continue to disrupt the boarding process, we'll have no choice but to remove you from the flight." The injustice of the situation was breathtaking. Michael wasn't disrupting anything. He was simply occupying the seat he had paid for. He looked around the cabin, noting how many passengers were now openly recording the interaction. Part of him wanted to simply move, to avoid the escalating confrontation. But a deeper part, the part that remembered his father's words about integrity, refused to bend. "Are you removing me from this flight because I won't give up my assigned seat to another passenger who simply prefers it?" Michael asked directly, his voice carrying clearly through the now silent cabin. The question hung in the air, its implications impossible to ignore. Several passengers shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Before the captain could respond, Barbara interjected loudly, "This is ridiculous. I've never been treated so poorly in all my years of flying elite. Do you have any idea how much money I spend with this airline annually?" The irony wasn't lost on the other passengers, several of whom exchanged glances of disbelief. The young woman in 2B continued filming, her phone now held openly rather than discreetly. "This is your final warning," Captain Reynolds stated. "Move to another seat or we'll call security." Michael slowly reached for his phone and began recording. "I want to be clear about what's happening here. I'm being threatened with removal because I won't give up my assigned seat to another passenger who wants it." His voice was steady, his movements deliberate. "This appears to be discriminatory treatment." Mark reached for Michael's phone. "Recording is not permitted." "Actually," Michael interrupted calmly, "there's no federal law prohibiting recording on an aircraft unless it interferes with crew duties. I'm simply documenting this interaction for my own protection." The legal knowledge caught Mark off guard. He withdrew his hand, but his expression darkened further. Without another word, he retreated to the galley where he picked up the phone again, this time speaking with urgent gestures. Within minutes, 2 airport security officers boarded the plane. The cabin fell completely silent as all attention focused on Michael's row. One officer was young and clearly uncomfortable. The other was older, with the weathered expression of someone who'd seen it all. "Sir," the older officer began, "we've been informed there's a situation requiring your removal from the aircraft." Michael nodded once, acknowledging the officer's presence while maintaining his dignity. "I'd like to understand the specific airline policy I'm violating," he requested, his voice clear and measured. "I'm sitting in my assigned seat with a valid boarding pass and premium status." The security officers exchanged uncomfortable glances. It was becoming increasingly obvious they had been called to remove a passenger who had violated no rules. "Sir, you need to gather your belongings and come with us," the younger officer stated, avoiding the question entirely. With quiet dignity, Michael began gathering his belongings. He closed his laptop case, tucked his presentation notes into his briefcase, and stood slowly, As he rose, he made eye contact with several passengers who had witnessed the entire exchange. Some looked away, embarrassed. Others met his gaze with silent apology. Barbara made no attempt to hide her satisfaction, a smug smile playing at the corners of her mouth as she watched Michael being escorted from his seat. As he passed, she immediately slid into the now vacant tray, arranging her belongings as though staking claim to territory. Finally, she sighed loudly. Some people just don't understand how things work. As Michael walked down the aisle toward the exit, head held high, a murmur ran through the cabin. "This isn't right," someone said quietly. "He didn't do anything wrong," added another voice, slightly louder. The young woman who had been recording stood up suddenly. "I'm getting off too," she announced. "I can't be part of this." She gathered her belongings quickly and followed Michael and the security officers. Behind them, as they stepped through the aircraft door, Sarah approached Barbara with a complimentary glass of champagne. "I'm so sorry for the disruption, Ms. Whitman. We want to ensure the rest of your flight is perfect." What the crew didn't see, but what was captured clearly on multiple passengers' videos, was Barbara discreetly slipping a folded bill into Sarah's pocket as she accepted the champagne. "Thank you for handling that situation," she murmured, just loudly enough to be heard by those nearby. "First class should have standards." What Elite Airways didn't realize was that in removing Michael Jordan from the flight, they had just made the most expensive mistake in the company's history. As Michael stepped into the terminal, escorted by security, he maintained the composed demeanor that had served him throughout his career. Only when they reached the main concourse did he stop. "Thank you, gentlemen. I can find my way from here," he said politely. The older security officer hesitated. "Sir, for what it's worth, I don't think that was handled right back there." He glanced at his younger colleague, who nodded in agreement. "The report we received doesn't match what we saw." Michael appreciated the small gesture of decency. "Thank you. I'd like both your names for my records, if you don't mind." After they departed, Michael pulled out his phone and made 2 calls. The first was to his chief operating officer, Aisha Williams. "Aisha, it's Michael. I need you to cancel the meeting with Elite Airways tomorrow and contact their CEO directly. Tell him—" He paused, considering his words carefully. "Tell him we need to discuss a serious incident that just occurred on one of their flights." The second call was to his legal team, Jeffrey. "I need you to document an incident of discrimination that just occurred on Elite Airways Flight 372. I was removed from my assigned seat for refusing to give it up to a white passenger. The entire interaction is on video, both mine and other passengers." As Michael spoke, the young woman who had left the plane in solidarity approached hesitantly, carrying her small roller bag. "Excuse me," she said. "I'm Emma Chen. I followed you off the plane because I couldn't just sit there and be part of what was happening. I recorded everything from the moment that flight attendant first approached you." She held up her phone, showing Michael the video. Clear, unobstructed footage that captured not only his removal, but also the damning moment when Barbara slipped money to Sarah after he was escorted off. "This was clearly discrimination," Emma continued, her voice tightening with emotion. "I'm happy to send you this and serve as a witness if needed. What happened back there was wrong." Michael's expression softened for the first time since the ordeal began. "Thank you, Emma. That means a lot. This may be very helpful." They exchanged contact information, Emma promising to send him the full unedited video immediately. What she didn't know, what none of them knew, was that her video would soon be seen by millions. What most passengers didn't realize, what Barbara Whitman and the Elite Airways crew certainly didn't know, was that Michael Jordan's company wasn't just any potential business partner for Elite Airways. Equity AI owned 23% of Elite Airways stock, acquired gradually over the past 3 years as part of a strategic investment in transportation companies that could benefit from their bias detection technologies. And the airline had been courting Equity AI for a $30 million contract to overhaul their booking systems and customer service technology. The deal, nearly a year in the making, was supposed to be finalized the following day. Within 30 minutes of Michael's removal, videos of the incident were already circulating on social media. Elite Airways discrimination began trending, with passengers sharing multiple angles of the confrontation. Elite Airways just kicked a black premium member off a flight to give his seat to a white woman who preferred it. "This is what discrimination looks like in 2023, read one viral tweet, already accumulating thousands of retweets. The flight attendant took money to kick him off. Watch till the end. Elite Airways, Karen Dashkar corruption, read another, accompanied by Emma's damning footage. In Elite Airways corporate headquarters, CEO Richard Williams was reviewing quarterly projections when his phone rang with an urgent call from the PR department. "Sir, we have a serious situation developing. A video is going viral showing one of our passengers being removed from a flight this morning." Williams sighed, initially dismissive. "Passengers get removed for disruptive behavior every day, Janet. Handle it with the standard statement." "Sir, this is different," the PR director insisted. "The passenger was not disruptive. He was a black man in first class who refused to give up his assigned seat to a white woman. The video clearly shows our staff accepting cash from the woman after his removal." The blood drained from Williams's face. "Send me the video now." As he watched the footage, his expression shifted from concern to horror. The clear discrimination, the money changing hands, the dignified composure of the man being removed. It was a PR catastrophe unfolding in real time. "Who is he? Have we identified the passenger?" Williams demanded. "Yes, sir. According to the manifest, his name is Michael Jordan." Williams collapsed back into his chair, staring blankly at the ceiling. "Michael Jordan, the CEO of Equity AI, the company we've been courting for that $30 million contract, the company that owns nearly a quarter of our stock?" "Yes, sir. And his office just called. They've canceled tomorrow's meeting and requested that you contact Mr. Jordan directly. Get him on the phone immediately and arrange an emergency board meeting. This is—" Williams struggled to find the words. "This is potentially catastrophic." Meanwhile, Michael had been busy. While waiting in the airport lounge for the next available flight, his legal team was already preparing documentation for a discrimination lawsuit. His PR team was monitoring the rapidly spreading social media firestorm, where Elite Airways discrimination and boycott Elite Airways were trending nationally. When Williams finally reached Michael by phone, his voice was strained with forced cordiality. "Mr. Jordan, I want to extend our deepest apologies for the inexcusable incident that occurred this morning." "Mr. Williams," Michael responded calmly, "I appreciate your willingness to speak with me directly. As you may be aware, my company owns approximately 23% of Elite Airways shares. I want to call an emergency shareholder meeting immediately. The events of today have raised serious concerns about Elite's corporate culture and commitment to ethical treatment of all passengers." There was a moment of silence on the line as Williams processed the implications. "Of course, Mr. Jordan. We can arrange that immediately. In the meantime, is there anything we can do to—" "I'll see you at the meeting, Mr. Williams," Michael replied, ending the call. The emergency board meeting convened with unprecedented urgency. Board members had dropped everything to attend, some still in golf attire, others having rushed from family events. The tension in the room was suffocating as they waited for the arrival of the man who now held their fate in his hands. When Michael entered the boardroom, conversations ceased mid-sentence. Despite everything he had experienced, he carried himself with the quiet confidence of a man who knew exactly who he was and what he was worth. Behind him walked his executive team, Aisha Williams, their COO, Jeffrey Patel, legal counsel, and two others whose presence would later prove crucial to the transformation that was about to begin. Williams attempted a smile that came across as a grimace. "Mr. Jordan, thank you for—" "Let's get started," Michael interrupted, taking his seat at the board table. Williams nodded, using a remote to dim the lights and activate the screen at the front of the room. The video began to play, crystal clear and devastating in its implications. Every moment was captured. Sarah's condescension, Mark's threats, the captain's weak justifications, and Barbara slipping cash to Sarah after Michael's removal. When the footage ended, the room remained silent for a full 30 seconds. Several board members couldn't maintain eye contact with Michael. Williams cleared his throat, his face ashen. "Mr. Jordan, we want to express our deepest apologies for the inexcusable treatment you experienced today. This behavior does not reflect the values of Elite Airways, and I'm not interested in apologies," Michael interrupted, his voice calm but resolute. The bluntness of his response sent a visible ripple through the room. Board members shifted, uncomfortably in their leather chairs, suddenly aware that standard corporate damage control would not suffice. As your largest individual shareholder, I have two demands. First, every staff member involved is terminated immediately. Second, I am canceling the proposed contract between Equity AI and Elite Airways. Williams glanced nervously at the board members. "Mr. Jordan, while we understand your frustration, perhaps we could consider suspensions instead. Some of these employees have been with the company for many years, and our union agreements— This isn't negotiable," Michael stated firmly, placing his hands flat on the table. "It's accountability, or I'll pull my investment and take my business elsewhere." The implications hung heavy in the air. 23% of their stock suddenly dumped on the market would be catastrophic. The loss of the $30 million modernization contract would leave them years behind their competitors. As if on cue, the boardroom doors burst open. A financial analyst rushed in, tablet in hand. "Sir, news of the incident is affecting our stock price significantly. We're down 8% and falling. Market analysts are predicting a possible 20% drop by closing if we don't take decisive action." Williams looked from the tablet to Michael and back again, the reality of his situation becoming painfully clear. This wasn't just about one incident anymore. It was about the very survival of the airline. "The employees will be terminated immediately," Williams conceded. "But Mr. Jordan, without the contract your company was offering, we'll struggle to implement the very changes needed to prevent situations like this in the future." Michael exchanged a look with Aisha, his COO. She nodded slightly, confirming a pre-discussed strategy. "I have an alternative proposal," Michael said. "Equity AI will still provide you with our technology, but under different terms. You will implement a comprehensive company-wide training program. Every employee, from baggage handlers to pilots, will undergo bias training. You will revise your seating policies to eliminate subjective preferences that enable discrimination. And you will establish a passenger bill of rights that explicitly protects against discriminatory treatment." The board members looked at each other, calculating the costs against the alternative of losing their largest shareholder. "And what about the contract?" Williams asked cautiously. "The contract will be renegotiated at a 40% discount," Michael stated. "Consider it a financial penalty for what occurred today. Additionally, 1% of all Elite Airways profits for the next 5 years will be donated to scholarship programs for underprivileged youth interested in aviation careers." Williams swallowed hard but nodded. "We accept your terms." 3 floors below, in a sterile conference room devoid of luxury, Sarah, Mark, and Captain Reynolds sat in uncomfortable silence. They had been summoned without explanation, though the growing whispers throughout the company had given them reason for concern. The HR director entered promptly, accompanied by the company's legal counsel and 2 security officers, who positioned themselves discreetly by the door. The presence of security wasn't standard procedure for performance reviews or even disciplinary meetings. It signaled something far more serious. "I'll be direct," the HR director began, placing 3 identical folders on the table. "Your employment with Elite Airways is terminated, effective immediately." The statement landed like a physical blow. Sarah's hand flew to her mouth, stifling a gasp. Mark's face contorted with indignation. Captain Reynolds simply closed his eyes, his weathered face suddenly looking decades older. "We are sorry," Mark began, his voice rising with each word. "We were just following procedure. That passenger was being difficult and disrupting the boarding process." The HR director's expression remained impassive as she opened her laptop and turned it toward them. The now viral video began to play, their words and actions perfectly captured, including the moment Barbara slipped cash into Sarah's pocket, her words about maintaining standards audible despite her attempt to speak quietly. Was accepting money from a passenger to discriminate against another passenger part of our customer service protocol? The HR director asked, her tone making it clear there was no acceptable answer. Sarah broke down in tears. "We made a terrible mistake," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I knew it was wrong, even as it was happening. But I didn't stop it. I needed the extra money for my daughter's medical bills, but that's no excuse." Captain Reynolds, a man who had navigated through literal storms during his career, seemed unable to weather this one. "I was just trusting my crew's assessment," he offered weakly. "I didn't personally witness the initial confrontation." "You all failed in your responsibility today," the HR director stated firmly. "Not just to the company, but to basic human decency. The passenger you removed was Michael Jordan, CEO of Equity AI and our largest individual shareholder. The same company we've been courting for a $30 million partnership." The revelation hit them like a second blow. Sarah's crying intensified. Mark's face, previously flushed with anger, now drained completely of color. "You will be escorted to collect your personal belongings and then to the exit," the HR director continued. "Your final pay will include 2 weeks' severance, which is more than generous given the circumstances." As they were led from the room, the 3 former employees experienced what Michael had felt earlier that day, the humiliation of being escorted out while others watched. The symmetry was both perfect and devastating. In the main auditorium of Elite Airways headquarters, hundreds of employees had gathered for an unprecedented announcement. CEO Williams stood on stage, flanked by Michael Jordan and his team. "Today, Elite Airways failed one of our passengers in the most fundamental way," Williams began, his voice carrying through the hushed room. "This failure wasn't just an isolated incident. It was symptomatic of systemic issues that we must address immediately and comprehensively." He gestured to Michael, who stepped forward to explain the path forward. Every single employee of Elite Airways will undergo comprehensive bias training before returning to service, Williams continued. This training program, developed by Equity AI, will become a permanent part of our onboarding and continuing education. Murmurs spread through the crowd as employees recognized the magnitude of what was being announced. A company-wide training program would cost millions and disrupt operations significantly. This isn't just about punishing those involved, Michael explained, addressing the gathered employees directly. It's about transforming your entire culture. What happened today wasn't wrong because I happened to be a shareholder. It would have been equally wrong if I were a teacher, a doctor, or a student traveling home. The employees listened in silence, many nodding in agreement, others looking down in shared embarrassment at what had been done in their company's name. Starting tomorrow, the CEO announced in the final powerful moment of the meeting, Elite Airways will implement a company-wide grounding for mandatory training. Every flight, every route, every service will be suspended for 24 hours, while our entire staff participates in the first phase of this program. The gasps were audible throughout the auditorium. In an industry where minutes of delay cost thousands, a 24-hour complete shutdown was unprecedented. It would cost the airline millions, but the message it sent about their commitment to change was priceless. 6 months later, Elite Airways had transformed itself. New hiring practices ensured diversity at all levels. Customer satisfaction scores were at an all-time high across all demographic groups. For the first time, Black, Hispanic, and Middle Eastern passengers reported service. Experiences equal to or better than those of white passengers. The toxic culture that had festered beneath the surface for years had been exposed to the light and was healing. Most surprising was the initiative Michael announced through his foundation. The Second Chance program, designed specifically for individuals who had lost their jobs due to bias incidents. Accountability doesn't mean permanent punishment, Michael explained at the press conference launching the program. It means earning your way back. We cannot build a more just society if we don't create pathways for those who have acknowledged their mistakes and done the work to change. Among the first participants in the program were Sarah, Mark, and Captain Reynolds. The journey wasn't easy for any of them. The program required them to confront uncomfortable truths about themselves and understand the impact of their actions, not just on Michael, but on countless others who experienced similar treatment without the power to fight back. Sarah, who had initially been the most resistant, underwent the most profound transformation. In group sessions, she spoke about never questioning the biases she had inherited until they cost her everything. I never saw myself as prejudiced, she admitted during one particularly powerful session. I thought that because I didn't use slurs or explicitly hate anyone, I was one of the good ones. This experience has shown me how bias operates even when we don't recognize it in ourselves. With certificates from the program in hand, all three began applying for entry-level positions at different airlines. Their applications now included their story, not as an excuse, but as context for the growth they had undergone. The certificates didn't erase their past actions, but they demonstrated a commitment to change that some employers found compelling. Sarah was the first to secure a position, not as a flight attendant, but as a ground crew member at a regional carrier. The pay was less than half of what she had earned at Elite, the hours longer and the work physically demanding, but it was a second chance she had once thought impossible. In a private meeting at Elite Airways headquarters 1 year after the incident, Michael sat across from CEO Richard Williams, reviewing the progress report. "You've shown real change," Michael acknowledged, closing the folder containing the latest metrics. "That deserves recognition." Williams nodded, the weight of the previous months evident in the new lines on his face. "This hasn't been easy," he admitted. "But it's been necessary. What happened to you that day forced us to confront issues we'd been ignoring for years." "That's often how change happens," Michael replied. "Not through comfort, but through confrontation." The two men stood and shook hands, no longer adversaries, not quite friends, but partners in a transformation that was changing not just one airline, but setting a new standard for an entire industry. Because sometimes, justice isn't about punishment. Sometimes, it's about progress. If this story moved you, hit subscribe and share to spread the message. Remember, treat others with the dignity they deserve, regardless of their appearance. You never know who might be sitting next to you.